The United Nations Convention Against Corruption covers many different forms of corruption, such as bribery, trading in influence, abuse of functions, and various other acts. Egypt is to host the 9th conference of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption from the 13th to the 17th of December 2021 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and has established the National Committee to Prevent and Combat Corruption and launched its first national strategy to fight corruption between 2014 and 2018, and is now in the second stage between 2019 and 2022. The aim is to have a society that understands the dangers of corruption, a society that rejects it and raises the value of integrity. Efficiency can also be added to combating corruption, because inefficient management can be considered a detriment to society, a detriment to development. That can be found in decision-making positions or even providing services to citizens, which we face daily. Another form of corruption and another abuse of function. Solution? Institutional reform. That is the process that this country has adopted. Good evening. Welcome to the Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. Our weekly program tackles events affecting economies and business, and we aim to bring you the inside story. Welcome back to the Business Insider. Let's start with our first news item for today. Wednesday marks the last day to receive feedback from investors on the Unified Tax Measures Executive Regulations. Business leaders and lobby groups are part of a joint committee with the Finance Ministry set up to address investor concerns, including the implementation of the Real Estate Tax Act. According to the Ministry of Finance, the committee brings together the Investors Union and the Federation of Egyptian Industries. Industry has been calling for real estate tax relief since the beginning of the year, when the Investors Union urged the government to abolish the tax for factories. All right, the second news item is that Egypt sold $3.75 billion in bonds on Monday to finance a portion of its fiscal deficit with maturities of 5, 10, and 40 years. The Minister of Finance, Mohammed Maid, said that the country has no plans to return to the international debt market before the end of the first half, despite the low interest rates globally. The state budget gives the government the license to borrow up to $7 billion through debt instruments in the international market, of which the ministry has so far used a little over half in fiscal year 2020 to 2021. The issuance received some $16.5 billion in orders, making it more than 4.4 times oversubscribed. With us on the line is Mr. Khaled Abouhaif, board member of the Egyptian Capital Markets Association, and he's here to comment on this last news item. Mr. Abouhaif, a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. Let's start with the news item for tonight. This is the first Eurobond sale in the current fiscal year. It's the second time Egypt sells 40-year bonds. What do you make of the subscription coverage?
Hello, Mr. Ayman. How are you? And the pleasure is mine. This indicates for us that there is an appetite for subscribing the offer from the government in terms of bonds, which reflects a lot of confidence in the Egyptian financial products. So what indicates for us that when it's covered or oversubscribed by 4.5, I think this indicates that there is oversubscription. This indicates that relatively to the countries, the emerging market countries that issue such a bonds, we are selective because our coverage is a little bit higher than their coverages in this period of time, as well as it indicates that the rates is good, as well as the risk is accepted from the other side, from the buyers.
All right, you said the time. Well, what about the timing? How do you evaluate the timing of the issuance of those bonds?
You know, at the pandemic and the effect of this pandemic on the markets, definitely the debts products is much more lucrative than the equities. So when that happened, the people select between what to buy and when to buy. And the timing, from my point of view, is a good time to position that in the market. And we have an evidence by His Excellency Minister Maït. He said that there is no plans to issue till the end of this physical governmental year, which is going to end by June 2021. This indicates that he chose the time to make it all one tranche for the 3 periods, the 5 years, the 10 years, and the 40 years. And I think this is a right time to launch that in the market.
All right, so Egypt to investors is, in terms of risk, it's a low-risk investment. Where do we stand in terms of risk and in terms of yield as well?
For the risk, we are on the risk side. We are on the lower side of the risk. And the oversubscription is an evidence that the appetite of the investors, when the low risk is considered, the appetite for coverage comes more. So when it is oversubscribed 4.5, this tells us that this is an indicator for the low risk of the country. On another note, Egypt, while what's happening in all countries, we have around 200 countries in the world facing the same pandemic and its effects on the economicals and the economics of the countries. Egypt's position now is much better than others in terms of a lot of things. And this make a focus for a lucrative thing and maintain a low risk in terms of what's happening. Because the investors in that time was very selective. They try to maintain or position themselves by the much less risk. Much less risk is the thing that a target for all the investors now to maintain their position, to have a defensive position in terms of what's happening in all the world. So we have not a moderate risk, we are in terms of low risk level.
Mr. Khaled Abou Hayf, board member of the Egyptian Capital Markets Association, thank you very much for joining us, sir. We'll be back in a moment. With us tonight is a very special guest. He is the Vice Minister of Finance for Fiscal Policies and Institutional Reform, a man with a very rich background and a man who has contributed to this country's economic reform process. Dr. Ahmed Kujouk coming up next here on the Business Insider. Welcome back. You're watching the Business Insider. Tonight I am joined by special, very special and dear friend, Dr. Ahmed Kujouk, the Vice Minister of Finance for Fiscal Policies and Institutional Reform. Pleasure to have you with us. And we'll jump right into the subject. Egypt just issued bonds. To some, they were worried. They were worried about a number of factors, but mainly one of the main factors is the debt level. Let's talk about the receptivity of the bonds and how it was received in the world market, number one. And what message were you in the Ministry of Finance trying to achieve?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you also, Ayman. It's always great to be with you, and I hope that today we can cover some important issues and explain also how the government and how the Ministry of Finance of Egypt has been managing certain things. But regarding to the latest issuance, our bond issuances, which happened last Monday, Let me tell you a couple of observations and couple of things that people have to understand and to be aware of. This bond issuance happened early in February, and we went to the market, and the market is a place better to get from it how the world and how investor community is perceiving the country. This is the best testimony. This is the best indicator. It's better than reports, it's better than analysis, because this is where people put their money and invest in a certain country. So nobody would give you an extra credit for something and give you something for the country if it's not well calculated. What we saw in this transaction is I think, is very good testimony, not only because of the coverage which was mentioned in a lot of things, but also the rates. We were able to issue the 5 years at a rate of 3.875, the 10 years at a rate of 5.875, and the 40 years we had over four times subscription in the 40 years also. We got it at 7.5%. So one can ask, is this a good rate or not? So let me put things into perspective. Back in May, the last time we went to the market, of course, this was at the peak of the COVID. And by the way, at that time, we were the first emerging country to open the market, which needs a lot of confidence. But at that time, we were able to issue 4 years bond at 5.5%. We issued the 10 years at 7.5%. And we issued at that time the 30 years at above 8%. So one can say this was post-COVID, this was the peak. So let's go and see when we went to the market in November 2019, just before COVID. The COVID was not there. We were able to issue also the 4 years at 5.1%, and the 10 years at also 6.5%. And at that time, the 40 years was also above 8%. The bottom line, COVID happened, more uncertainty, more negative developments globally. The sentiment is not as pre-COVID, yet investors are treating Egypt in the sense, treating the sovereign. These bonds are a sovereign issuance. It's the country is issuing it. It's treating it much more favorably, which is something that it's the best testimony that they are seeing the country on the right track and things are improving on a sustainable way. And there is a relative issue here. They are seeing Egypt. Of course, we have been affected like all other countries. I'm not saying that this is something normal, that global economic conditions have a big impact on every single country. But investors expect two things. They are seeing that what we are saying we're delivering. When we say targets or revised targets, at the end of the year, they are seeing the numbers achieved. When they say that we are going to do 1 and 2 and 3 in terms of policies, they are seeing to a great extent a very strong, I would say, abiding and implementation according to the plans. So this is something. And second, they are also seeing us on ongoing engagement with them. We went to the market because we were ready. And we were ready because we are always, every single week and month, we are talking to them. We are sharing with them the numbers. We're sharing them to the story every single day. So we were ready. We were ready to go to the market. So those are very two important things. And I think Egypt now is treated much more fairly, given its success record and given its outcomes that has been overachieving compared to a lot of other countries and emerging countries.
So the message can be summed up in credibility, in trust. We deliver what we promise.
Exactly.
Let's watch this report and let's continue our discussion with His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Kujouk, the Vice Minister of Finance for Fiscal Policies and Institutional Reform.
Egypt was one of the few countries in the world with a positive growth rate in 2020. In its most recent January 2021 update of the World Economic Outlook, the IMF has revised GDP growth projections for Egypt to 2.8% in 2021 and 5.5% in 2022. According to IMF estimates, GDP growth fell from 5.6 in 2019 to 3.5 in 2020. Despite this slowdown, the economy is due to recover, subject to a post-pandemic global economic recovery. Proactive measures taken to address health and social needs and support the most directly affected sectors help mitigate the economic and human impact of the crisis. Before the pandemic, the country was already in a strong position as it had implemented an economic reform program comprising fiscal consolidation measures, the introduction of a floating exchange rate, and large cuts in subsidies. Egypt pursues its economic reform program designed to support the country in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, with a 2020 budget deficit slight increase to 7.5% of GDP from 7.2%, and is expected to widen to 8.5% in 2021, before decreasing again in 2022 to 5.7% due to the economic recovery. Public debt to GDP ratio increased to 86.6% in 2020, up from 83.8%, and is expected to reach 90.6% in 2021, before declining again in 2022 to 87.8%. Appropriate monetary policy allowed the inflation rate to further decrease in 2020, reaching 5.7%. Priorities for 2021 include supporting the economic recovery, as the external environment remains fragile with the pandemic, less favorable financing conditions for emerging markets, and a drop in remittance, which make up a large chunk of foreign exchange income. The official unemployment rate, after reaching its highest level in the past 11 years in 2015, has been declining slowly since then and fell to around 8.3% in 2020, according to IMF estimates.
Welcome back to the Insider, to the Business Insider. I'm joined by His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Kuczuk, the Vice Minister of Finance for Fiscal Policies and Institutional Reforms. A pleasure to have you with us on the show. We continue our discussion. Let me just comment here on the budget deficit, the slight increase. It's from negative 7.5 to up from minus 7.2 and so on. It's with a negative percentage, not positive here. Let me take it from this report and the IMF's reading into the Egyptian economy to the bond sale and the debts, the debt instruments that we're utilizing, and say that there are concerns from the debt level.
Yes.
Are we reaching a debt level that is worrisome, or are we in the safety zone, if you will? Should we be concerned?
The Ministry of Finance of Egypt, and we as a team managing the public finance in Egypt, we are always very happy when we see people talking about that, concerned about that. This is a big achievement. The people are now following indicators, are analyzing things, are really want to see the macroeconomic environment and the indicators in a safer position for their kids, for the new generation, for their children, basically for the future of Egypt. So this is something we are very pleased to see and to hear, and it's adorable, really, to have this genuine interest in those indicators. Let me go and tell you that we are not yet there. No, we want to continue our debt. To continue reducing our debt to GDP ratio. That's something that definitely it's our ambition. Last December, the Ministry of Finance of Egypt published on its website, and everybody can go and check it, its medium-term debt strategy. And in this debt strategy, our target is to take the debt to GDP ratio by June 2024 to around 80%. But let us not forget also where we're coming from. In June 2018, our debt to GDP ratio, our government debt, domestic and external, was 108% of our GDP. And this is the normal benchmark, because we have to always compare the debt to your income. both at an individual level or a company level or even at the country level. That's the normal thing. If you go to a bank, they will ask you the same. If you want to get a loan from a bank, they will ask you how much you earn. The same as a country. If you go to the market, they will ask you how much you are earning every year. So our debt was above our income, annual income. It was 108%. We were able in June 2019 to bring this down to 90.2%. So almost 18% decline in our debt to GDP ratio in 2 years.
You're including the internal and the external
Everything.
debt, not just the internal.
Everything.
Right.
This is the total debt. And this is a big achievement for the country. The 90% is not what we are celebrating or what we are over. The 90% is still high debt to GDP ratio.
But the decrease is
But
an
the
achievement.
improvement is what we're really proud of, because this is what the people supported the economic reform program to achieve that. So we are very happy that the people are worried about the debt level, but they should be also proud that their government and their support and the collective effort of the entire Egyptian people, and of course the leadership support and taking the courage to support such reform program, we reached to this level. This is June 2019. Then we have the COVID, and we saw what's happening globally. And despite that, Egypt in June 2020, total debt also went from 90.2 to 87.5%. So it's a decline in these difficult times. This is remarkable. When you see what's happening in emerging markets, you are seeing on average debt increasing from 50-something, which is much lower than us, and this is where we should be going, to around 70%.
And taking into consideration the decrease in your income.
Of course, and
The
in GDP,
remittances,
of course.
the tourism, the Suez Canal.
That's not easy. And that's exactly when I was telling you that investors respect countries that manage things. Respect when you are more proactive. This is not easy. Our revenues are affected. It's not about that we
How
are
was that
isolated.
achieved?
Because we were very proactive. We did the right stimulus at the right time. We did it through measures that were temporary, that were very effective. We selected the most affected industries and the most affected segments of the society, and we focused there. We did as much as possible. Also, we are benefiting from a lot of the previous reforms and the ongoing reforms on the administrative side. The automation. The automation is incredible. The amount of automation happening in collection of revenues, in spending also, is really helping us to be able to be more efficient, to be more effective. We are doing more.
That's what I mentioned in the introduction when I said efficiency
Fully agreed.
is something, it can be in the corruption definition. Lack of efficiency is a contributor to corruption.
It's a very important dimension. You can do more with the same. And by the way, in what you are in the very nice report that was mentioned, in the IMF report, global report, they have a section, and I'm encouraging everybody to go and check it. They are doing a very nice comparison where they see how much countries have done in terms of fiscal stimulus and the outcomes. And we are very proud to see that Egypt came as one of the most efficient countries in terms of using the fiscal stimulus, because we were able to spend around 2% of GDP in stimulus, which was announced by the president back in April. And we were able, as rightly said, to achieve a positive growth, which was a phenomenal last year, of 3.6%. And this tells you that there is a very good, I would say, planning. You said us how we did it. We did it because we were able to put the right framework. We said we will do what is needed for the health sector. This is no question about it. Whatever is needed for that sector, people's life, people's safety is not for negotiation or selection. This is whatever is needed, we'll do it. But when we come to the industry, we focus on the manufacturing, we focus on the industry, and we focus on export activities. And we give this as much as possible as support.
Export subsidies, where are they?
Export subsidies, and you can check with all exporters.
We talked about this some time ago.
I can tell you numbers. Last year, we were able to inject around 17 to 18 billion Egyptian pounds to exporters to pay any previous due payments or ongoing payments through different initiatives.
Can you run that number by me?
17 to 18 billion Egyptian pounds in 12 months went as a liquidity, as cash, not as promised notes, not as paper. Cash went to exporters.
I remember in 2018 when we discussed this, they were due around 11 billion at the time.
Right, and of course, with any additional due payments or even ongoing payments, we accelerated things through different initiatives. And that's very important. And that's why when you look at what's called the PMI, which is a leading indicator, it's called the Purchase Manager Index, which it's a leading indicator that look or try to measure, it's a global indicator, it's done for Egypt, done for every single country. When you look at the PMI for Egypt, over the last 5 months, one of the best indicators are our expert sub-indicator in the PMI. It's something we're very proud of, and it's only, I'm not saying that so that we relax, I'm saying that because we are really dealing with experts as a top priority, as an entire government, and also as the Ministry of Finance.
Other types of stimulus measures?
We did, of course, tourism was very important, and recreation in general. It's one of the most affected sectors globally. So we did a couple of things. We did a guarantee where banks can provide loans to all affected industries in the tourism sector at a very good rate and with a very good, I would say, repayment terms, as well as periods that they can enjoy without
grace
periods. We did also a couple of exemptions for the tourism industry, and we are still focusing on renewing and extending all the support for the industry. We provide also support in terms of loan as well as guarantees for our aviation industries. We did a lot of support to contractors also, so we accelerated the payments so that basically we tried to inject as much as possible liquidity, but I'm very also, I have to say, we did it as much as possible in a balanced way. We saw a lot of other countries, by the way, doing it in the sense that they did a lot of injections, but then they took difficult measures. They raised the taxes, or they increased fees, or whatever. I think Egypt, to a great extent, had a very balanced approach. We are also approaching and dealing from day one with this pandemic that it's not a very short-term issue. And we said from day one, our objective is to be able, we will be affected, but to be able to run back once it's behind us. So we want to stay healthy and to be able to run back once it's behind us, rather than to be very exhausted.
You need to keep the industries, the affected industries, floating until the end, until we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. Now, two things. You mentioned taxes. This is one thing I'm keen on learning from you. Some see that a country with a stable tax regime is an attractive country for investment. Can you say that the current tax regime, the plans that you are following at this time, do they give this sense?
Well, I think you're very, very accurate and right in what you said. People and investors, domestic and international, they are always looking for predictability so that they can plan. Right. They want to make their investment plans, and the people and investors specifically like the credibility and like predictability. So it's very clear. And that's why we have been working with a lot of international institutions, the OECD, the World Bank, the IMF, to compile our medium-term revenue strategy. And actually it was presented to the cabinet and it was approved, the draft, and now we are discussing it with the business community. And the idea is simple, as you said, is to tell the people from day one, for the next 4 years, what's our objective. But our objective is definitely stability, as you said. We think that there is a lot can be done through automation, through integrating the informal sector, through integrating all economic activities into the tax net and into the formal sector. The idea is not to pay tax, the idea is to be formal, so that the country can provide to you all the services. And the country can really help you open new markets, expand, get credit. So we need to build a lot of trust. And we did this, I think, when we issued, and now it's a law, it's effective, the new small and medium enterprise law. This has a lot of packages and a lot of incentive for companies and individuals to come to the formal sector. We have a very simple tax rate for those making up till even 10 million in turnover. It's either a flat rate or a % of your turnover, and with a very light procedures.
A flat rate of?
I think until, if you are making until to $250,000, you pay a flat rate of £2,500. If you are making up till 500 million, you pay, I think,
500,000?
If your turnover, if your annual sales,
500 million.
500 million,
Right.
you pay £5,000, and I don't remember the last. Until 1 million, I think you pay also a small and decent amount. Also, a flat rate. You pay a certain amount. It's very clear. You just go and pay it with a very light procedures, and you get from the tax authority a paper that
How
you
was
can.
that received?
It was just implemented because the law was there, but then the executive regulation came only a few days ago. So, but we at the Ministry of Finance were very well prepared to run and implement it very effectively, because we believe that this is a very good way to build the trust and also to encourage all the informal sector to come and join the formal sector and enjoy all the benefit of the formal sector.
I'm asking how was that received, because there's a process that you undergo and there's the dialogue with the stakeholders before it starts to be implemented. Did you feel that there will be a demand to enter into the formal sector by the companies that are outside of the formal sector, the informal sector, if you will?
I tell you my views. People will test you. And if things are well implemented, like anything else, credibility and predictability will come in. It's the same with foreign investors, with exporters, the same. Exporters kept saying this will not happen. When we did a couple of initiatives and we delivered, when we did the last initiative, when we paid exporters 85 in cash of all the due payments, we got requests and we delivered for more than 1,200 companies that joined voluntary. This was a voluntary mechanism. If you don't want to join it, you could have done it. 1,200 exporters came, joined. And when now we extended this initiative to pay exporters 85% in cash of all their due payments, we are still getting hundreds of companies' requests every day.
All right. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time, and I have a lot of things I want to ask you. Privatization, where are we on that? Can we expect certain companies to be privatized in the near future in order to add to your messages, to your messages of trust and reform, that yes, there are companies that will be privatized, and maybe this will entice investors to come in at a stronger pace?
We're talking here about partnership rather than privatization. We talk about an IPO program where we want to share, widen the shareholders. That's like we widen the tax base, like widening the investor base. We want to also widen the investor base in our assets, because this will bring more expertise and it will create more value for the country, for the government, and for the private sector. So we're talking about IPOs, and I think the Sovereign Wealth Fund is has done also a very good work in this area over the last couple of months, looking at certain assets, preparing it in ongoing discussion with the private sector, trying to attract private sector to a lot of sectors and to segments, and I think they have done a very fantastic job, and they have a very excellent calibers that can really talk to investors and earn their trust. The problem is not our commitment there. The problem is that we have, when we were almost ready, we had the COVID with all its impact on the markets and everything. So are using this time to improve the performance of our, I would say, companies, of our institutions, of the assets that we have, so that we can be ready to partner with the private sector in a lot of things, both new projects and existing companies or existing projects. And I think there will be very good positive developments once the market, and the markets are starting to stabilize. We want to see this maybe for 4 to 5 to 6 months, because then we will have more confidence that we are also delivering, but also getting the fair result for the country and for the people. The people are the owner of those companies, by the way. So we are just working on their behalf to make sure that their assets is treated well, well managed, and also realizing the right yields for them.
All right. Developing cities, rural areas, villages, and so on, and formalizing the real estate wealth in those cities. Basically, this formalizes the informal sector, if you will. How does this contribute to bettering, enhancing Egypt's rating?
No, it's a very important dimension. I mean, basically, if we can and we are able to create a bigger economy, because we are joined by more individuals, because new startups or new entrepreneurs are coming, or existing ones that were working in the informal sector are joining, this means that we have a bigger cake, it means that we have a bigger economy, and this is the most important benchmark by every single rating agency or investor. So bigger country, a bigger economy is something very good for Egypt.
Dr. Ahmed Kujouk, the Vice Minister of Finance for Fiscal Policies and Institutional Reform, a pleasure having you on the show, and thank you for your analysis and for the information that you gave us.
Thank you, Ayman.
Pleasure, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure being with you here tonight on the Business Insider. We'll be back next week, same time on Nile TV International. I'm Ayman Salah. Good night.